I don't know all of God's plans to make it work out in the end, but I do have faith that it will. It helps me answer a lot of other hard questions, as people are asking questions about challenges that they're facing, whether that be reconciling sexual identity or reconciling pains done by trusted people, or health conditions, or times when they feel like their faith isn't answered, times when they pray or receive a blessing, and in the short term, even if that short term is the rest of their life, it doesn't go the way that they always thought that it would. That ultimately, if you trust in a point beyond your sight where things can work out, it gives you capacity to take the next step.
In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer, and I feel very honored to welcome our guest today, a very dear friend of mine who I love greatly, Dakota Dewaal.
Thank you.
Hi, Dakota.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm great.
I mean that sincerely. I want our listeners to know what a great privilege it is to have you on our podcast today. I've just admired your character and your goodness for years and years. So thank you so much for being willing to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm glad that I could come and grateful for the invitation.
Well, thank you, Dakota. Why don't you tell us your background, a little bit about where you were raised or how you were raised and who you are. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. I am a local of Cache Valley, Utah. I grew up here. I come from a family of 4. My mom and dad built a house in Nibley in 2000. We moved out there, and that's where I grew up. Me and my siblings. My youngest sibling was born the year that we moved in. So we all kind of shared that house together and grew up together. Since then, I graduated from high school and went to the university here in the Valley. Was there for 7 years. I joke, but it's not that much of a stretch that I took a class in almost every department on campus by the time I graduated, and bounced around between a couple of different programs, and finally got to the point where the university sent me a letter saying, hey, you've got so many credits that if you don't hurry up and pick a program, we're going to start charging you more money. And so I said, oh, all right, well, I guess I'll just find whatever can get me done the fastest and we'll get out of here.
Yeah.
So
what did you end up choosing?
I ended up graduating in liberal arts.
Oh, cool. And where did that take you professionally?
Professionally, it took me initially to a few different places. I started with a nonprofit here in town called Cash Makers. I worked with them a little bit before I graduated. They are a local makerspace where we do youth programs around STEM. Mm-hmm. And so I worked with them for a little while, and then...
My son was involved with the Lego League was involved at Cash Makers.
The Lego Robotics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's so cool. So you were with them for a while then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I started out just as a member of the staff, and then the organization underwent some changes because of some grant changes. And so I became the assistant program coordinator, helping facilitate a lot of those changes, built some internship programs, and did a few things that way. And then when my boss left, it was a good time for me to leave too. And so moved on to some other things and went to California for a summer, worked with a youth program out there, camp, and I was a counselor doing a few different programs, but the one that they mainly brought me out for was to teach all of these campers how to play Dungeons and Dragons while
that's
in the
cool.
mountains. So
That's fun.
that was a lot of fun.
I've got a son that'll like that story too. That's
Yeah.
great. So you did that for a summer, and then where did you go from there?
Then I came back and was kind of floundering for a little while trying to find something else because I didn't have my old job, didn't have any particular prospects for a new job. And so I had a conversation with one of my religious leaders and was like, I don't know what to do. And he told me, ultimately it doesn't matter what you do. You just have to choose something, take that next step and let it go where it's going to go. It's better than just continually spinning your wheels. And it proved to be the case. I got a job for the company I work with now. I started out in their billing department. And while I was there, they have a specific software that they use that really bothered me and had a lot of issues. And so I started preparing a list of, hey, if we could, we should change this, 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 and this. And submitted that to my manager. And the manager's like, none of these things are going to change. And I was like, what? This has to change. And so when an opportunity came up, I applied to their product development department and got a job there. And I've been doing software ever since. So
That's amazing. You saw a problem. You weren't okay with it just staying that way. So you did something about it.
Yeah. Well, I tried to.
Yeah.
I ended up in the product department, but working on a different project.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's good. So you're involved in that process of helping improve softwares for the company. Is that what it is?
Yep.
That's so great. Are you enjoying that?
I do. I think that it's been a really great learning experience. I already had a pretty strong passion for the importance of being software literate from my time at Cashmakers. That's where I kind of got my start. I think that the way the world is going, computers are already a part of your everyday life, and it makes such a difference to understand why they work the way that they do, even if it's a cursory knowledge. So
that's great. So during all that time, our background, we know each other through religious education and through choral programs.
Yeah.
And so we've spent some time there. I know that you were really involved with choirs and performance in the arts as well, if I remember. Is that correct?
Yeah. So starting in high school, I did a lot of musical theater. And then once I graduated, that shifted a little bit more into choir while I was at the university. I was involved with the religious choirs from the time that I got there, and then also got involved with the university choirs. I like to tell the story that there was one semester in particular that I was singing a part-time job because I calculated all of the hours a day that I was sitting in a choir, and it was more than 30 hours a week.
Wow.
So I did a lot of singing during that semester.
That's awesome. That gave you a lot of opportunities, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, I've done a lot with it since then. I've been involved with community theater a lot, some different choral opportunities as well.
That's great. And eventually, you met your wife in one of the choir situations, correct?
Yeah, so that was kind of a nice irony because I had finished at Utah State. I was graduated. I was out living, just kind of doing my thing. And I had a friend who's a few years younger than me that was still in school. And he said, hey, you should come do choir. Come back to choir. And I was like, I'm busy on the night that we have choir now. I did it for 7 years. I'm ready for the next chapter, And so he kind of pestered me a little bit, but eventually let it drop. And then one of the nights of choir, I had my plans fall through. And so I was like, I told my buddy I'd go to choir. So I went, showed up. It was fun to see some of the people that I knew, most of the people I didn't. Enough change happens from year to year. But I go and I sit down next to him and he's like, excellent. Now you can meet the women. And I knew immediately that I had been entrapped. But it worked out for the best because that night I met my wife for the first time. I'm pretty sure we didn't say anything to each other that night because she had a couple of very talkative roommates and she herself is more quiet. And so the three of them, I talked to the other two quite a bit and she kind of hung out in the back. But we had a few more opportunities to interact after that and had some times to talk. And eventually, yeah, we ended up getting married, and it's been great. We have one little boy now who's almost 2 years old, and we're expecting a little girl in September. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. How long have you been married now?
we've been married for 4 years.
Oh, that's great.
Coming up on 4 years.
That's great. What a great story. One of my favorite memories of you used to work at a restaurant here in town called the Bluebird.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this, but like, I'm trying to remember what those little fries are called, like English chips or something.
The English chips.
And you were like, Brother Stauffer, if you really want to up your game on this, you got to try it dipped in the hollandaise sauce that they make there. And so every time I went to the Bluebird after that, I ordered that thanks to you. So hopefully when they open up again, they'll have similar things on their menu. So
yeah, I'm curious to see what they do with it. It's under new ownership now, and so it could be totally different. But there's a lot of things that I loved about that place that I hope stay the same.
So many traditions and memories at the old Bluebird. So
yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, I am just so thankful that you're willing to be here to tell a little bit about your story. I know that your story has had a lot of trauma experienced, and I know that it can't be easy to share this. Do you want to share with our listeners just what that's been like before we even get into the details about deciding to come on the podcast to share this?
Yeah. So a little over 10 years ago, my father took his own life, and that's kind of the crux of what I'm going to talk about today.
And was that hard for you to be willing to come on something and share that as we go through this, like just the decision to come on the podcast did you wrestle with that?
I did a little bit. I don't ever have a problem talking directly with someone who wants to know more, because I think that being open and being real about the experiences that we have with challenging things is healthy. And it's not secret, but it is definitely something that I feel is pretty private. And while I don't mind sharing it with people directly, the thought of doing it more publicly through a podcast format was a little bit more intense than I initially anticipated. And so it definitely took a little bit of reconciling, but ultimately the reason that I decided to do it is that I think that, just like I said, when you talk about your stories and share the things that you've experienced, that it opens up that conversation for other people, and also helps you realize that you're not alone out there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having the courage. I just admire it so much. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your relationship with your dad?
So when I was growing up, my dad worked out of town a lot, and so he would be gone for sometimes weeks at a time. And to kind of illustrate the way that I felt about this as a younger kid, there was one time that I knew that he was coming home. He had been working in Las Vegas and was driving home in the rental car. And knowing that he was coming, I grabbed one of the folding chairs from the garage and sat out in the driveway for a couple of hours waiting for him to come home.
Waiting. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely admired my dad and had a lot of love for him. We weren't necessarily like friends in the sense that we would do a lot of things together one-on-one. So that was something for me. I would see contrast between the closeness that I saw among some of my siblings with my dad. I felt like they had a little bit more of that closeness going on. But I still always felt a lot of love for my dad.
Yeah. Did you notice or recognize any mental health issues in your father, or even just genetically in your family at all?
No, that was something that was really one of the biggest shocks for all of us when my dad passed. None of us had really seen it coming. The only indicator that we had of something going on is after the fact, one of his coworkers mentioned that he had been feeling down. And so it was really out of the blue not something that we had any forecasting signs with, no indicators that he was struggling or communication that he was struggling or previous attempts or anything like that. It was very out of the blue.
That, and I'm sure that adds its own challenges. Like as anyone would, you go back, you retrace your steps, you think about potential preventative measures that could have been taken or something like that.
Right.
Even though some of those thoughts are in error, we retrace our steps. It's so natural to do that. Did you find yourself doing that?
I did a little bit. I think that in my situation, I had kind of a unique experience in some sense because I felt a lot of responsibility to be a support for my family and for the people around me.
You're the oldest of the kids in your family, right?
Yeah, I'm
so
the
you
oldest
felt
sibling.
like a passing of the patriarch position to you.
Definitely, yeah. There was a lot of that I felt. And so with that, I didn't necessarily give myself a lot of room for those thinking errors, especially as I was talking to other people who I knew, being an outside perspective for them, that obviously this isn't your fault. Talking to my mom or talking to my sibling or talking to the many, many people that knew and loved my dad. Even the EMTs who showed up at our house the night that we found him, both my mom and my grandpa were volunteers with the EMT squad. And so their radio goes off and they get a call for potential suicide. And then the dispatcher sounds off my home address. And for both of them who were not there at the time to get that call on their radios was a big deal. And for this whole EMT squad who know my mom and know my grandpa and know my dad, they felt a lot of responsibility because they're out there as public servants doing their thing that they do every day. And I remember they invited me to come and sit in on their debrief one day. And I don't remember a lot of the conversation, but ultimately it came around to that idea of you can what if until you can't think of anything else anymore. And those what ifs won't do you any good. As much as they provide some sort of a comfort, some sort of a latch onto some sense of, I could have had control, really you didn't. And so for me, preaching that to other people, I had to adopt that mentality for myself very quickly as well.
Yeah. And did they bring you into the debrief? Because if I remember correctly, were you the one who found your father?
Yeah.
So you were the first one to discover him.
Yeah.
And then, and if this is too heavy of a question to ask, can you walk us through after that moment, since you were the one who found him? Did you feel a sense to protect your family members from the same discovery? How did you handle that moment?
I think that's such an important thing to talk about because while it is one of the hardest things for me to talk about, I think that it's super important. When I got home that night, I had been out with some friends. We'd gone to the corn maze. I got dropped off. I went inside and went down to my bedroom like I would on a normal day. I'd been down there for a little bit and had noticed my dad's truck in the driveway when I got home, but I hadn't seen or heard from him. I turned on my phone and had a missed call from him, and so I was like, what's going on? And went and looked around the house, and that's when I found him. He had hung himself in his shower, and I walked in, and there he was, and no one else was home. It was just me, and I didn't know what to do. I called 911 and talked to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher's like, all right, you said that he's hung himself. Can you cut him down? And in that moment of panic, I couldn't do it. And so I had a huge what if from the get-go of, In those moments, every second counts. And I couldn't do it. And the dispatcher knew the right answer. That's okay. I think one of the reasons that that's so important to me is because even though my dad was the victim in this suicide, suicide and those types of events, whatever they might be, whether it's an attempt, whether it's a suicide, whether it's any traumatic event, the victim isn't the only victim. And they don't have a monopoly on the pain or the hardship or the trauma. And in that moment, the trauma of the moment paralyzed me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Dakota, this is the first time I've ever heard these details.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted to ask you that question for 10 years now. And to hear that, I just feel so much love and compassion. Like I can't imagine the weight of that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
where to the outside listener, we understand the freeze in that moment, like without question. But the fact that there's a potential, to second guess those moments, and that you are, to anyone who hears this, it's nothing but love and compassion for that. But I can't imagine the pain that has brought you in your life, and how have you been able to work through that? What has helped you? I mean, that's so heavy.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of things that have helped me. One thing in particular is my faith. I know that for some people can sound like a cop-out answer, but I don't feel like it's a cop-out for me, because I consider my faith to be hard-earned. Even before my experiences with my dad, I didn't necessarily inherit my faith. It wasn't something that was directly given to me by my parents. Growing up, my family was in and out of activity in our church pretty regularly. And there was a long period of time that I went to church on my own by myself. I got up on Sunday, my family was going to the lake, and I said, I'm not going to come and do this thing that I want to do, because I want to go to church, because it's something that's important to me and something that I've chosen for myself rather than have someone choose for me.
Why was that? Why do you feel like you were wanting that? When the support system wasn't necessarily there.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you want that at an early age?
To me, it comes down to, it was something that was real for me. Even within my ward, I didn't feel a particular strong relationship with the other members of my quorum. There were members of the ward that I thought of as friends and that I loved, but I always felt like a little bit of the black sheep, partly because I was the guy coming by himself without his family.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, I had feelings that for me are real while I was there, and that to me were evidence of my faith. That's something that, through both the experience with my dad and a lot of other experiences, I like to use a metaphor of rock climbing for talking about faith. You have certain experiences that become your anchors. And when you have moments that are really hard, you can only fall as far as your next anchor. Or if your anchor's loose, you'll only fall past it as far as your next anchor. And so one of my early anchors was this decision for myself that this is something that I want in my life and that's personal to me, that I have this faith in God.
See, that is incredible to me. I've worked so often with young people who have a great support system, and this is not a knock against your family or anything like that, but it's atypical for the child to be the instigator of religious pursuit, and when I see it, it's exactly the way you described it. It's their own. It is. Like you said, it was not inherited. It was hard earned yourself. And what an amazing parallel that you had already invested in your spirituality, and that you claim that was a foundational impact on how you were able to cope with such trauma in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that is one of the most vivid memories for me following my experience with my dad. Certain images of traumatic experiences burn themselves into your brain, and you see them every time you close your eyes. And for me, the image of my dad hanging in the shower was one of those things. I can remember his face and the distortion that the physical trauma that he underwent as part of his hanging caused. And I remember sitting in church the next day, participating in the sacrament. And as part of that, I just said a little prayer. And I remember vividly just this picture in my mind of wrapping my dad in my arms, kissing him on the forehead, and laying him down. And just that mental image for me helped that disturbing picture go away and was replaced with the feelings of that picture of resolution. And ever since then, the disturbing image has never come back. And to me, I don't believe in coincidences. So the fact that I was able to have that experience and that moment in the middle of partaking of sacrament, something that I consider a very personal and intimate moment with God, to accept God and his gifts was, like I said, it was no coincidence that I could find healing before the altar of Christ.
That's so beautiful. It's so beautiful because you have, we can obviously an understanding of the trauma that the Savior went through in Gethsemane and on the cross and the torture and all of those violent images that we do see, and they are portrayed, that help us to understand the lengths of the pain and just all of what he went through. But the beauty is that it can be replaced by the hope of the resurrection, the risen Christ. And here we are, you're in that moment of remembering the suffering, the blood and the body of Christ sacrificed in violent ways, to be replaced by the hope that very ordinance is there for.
Yeah.
That we get to get back up and we get to try again, and that there is hope even in the ugliness of the pains that we've witnessed or been a part of.
Yeah.
It's just amazing that you saw that.
Yeah. I want to qualify this with something that I think is equally important. As much as I felt healing in that moment, it didn't fully take away my sadness. It didn't take away moments of pain that followed. It was another anchor point for me that in the coming weeks, each time that I felt depressed or that I was going down those mental lines of what if, or had I done this better, or if I hadn't been so focused on spending the night with this girl instead of being home, or whatever else it might have been, that I could come back to that moment of healing. And even though it wasn't a total transformation, it gave me a sort of touchstone that I could come back to and remember that healing.
That's so wise to point out, Dakota, because oftentimes we hear these stories and we might assume, oh, okay, it's the magic pill. Like that one experience completely transformed him, and he never had to deal with trauma from that point forward. And that's not an accurate portrayal of what you've been through. And so it helps our listeners to recognize, okay, we can have these moments of grace or goodness, religious or not. Maybe it's in the therapy side or the medical side of things, of getting help, or maybe it's on the faith and spiritual side of things. But they become, like you say, stepping stones or anchors that give us momentum to continue to go forward and face the challenges of our life.
Absolutely. I continue to have moments of pain, and sort of a sense of melancholy that attaches itself to all of the wonderful moments that I have in my life. When I was married and my dad couldn't be there, that was hard, despite the feelings of healing that I'd had, despite the forgiveness that I've felt to give him, despite all of these other things, it still hurt, and it was still really hard. My dad was always really great with little kids. All of my cousins, he was always the one that would give them great big hugs and throw them up into the air. And so growing up, I had this image of the future when we'd take my then just conceptualized future children, when we'd take them to Grandma and Grandpa's house, and Grandpa would scoop up my little kid and throw him up in the air. And to have those beautiful ideas die with my dad is still hard.
Now that you see that child in front of you.
Yep. It's the pain and the trauma, it doesn't go away. You just learn how to let it coexist so that you can feel joy in addition to the pain, without letting the pain consume everything, without surrendering to the darkness. I heard a metaphor that I really like for trauma, that says when you experience trauma, it's kind of like you're given a little box, and inside that box is a ball, and life comes and it shakes you around, and every time the ball touches the button, you feel pain. And as we learn and grow and move forward from experiences, the box and the button and the ball, they don't go away. But because you learn better what to do with your trauma, you learn better how to carry the box, and your box expands. So even if you're shaken, you don't touch the button as often or as hard. And I love that, because it's so important to remember that these things don't go away.
Yeah.
It will always be a part of you, but there's also the hope that you can learn to move forward with it.
A common parallel we've used as well is in Disney, the Pixar movie Inside Out, where you have this battle between joy and sadness, right?
Yeah.
Where Joy's biggest fear is that sadness takes over, and sadness doesn't know why she's doing what she's doing, but she exists and it's there and it's a reality. And then you see this spoiler alert to our listeners if you haven't seen Inside Out, but this beautiful illustration that joy and sadness can work together. And although, yes, sadness can bring a feeling of pain, and it doesn't mean that joy can't coexist with that sadness, and that you learn how, and it gives life more depth and more meaning than just putting our heads in the sand and trying to say that pain doesn't exist or sadness means that I'm broken.
Yeah. I love that movie showcases joy interacting with sadness, and ultimately, if you expend all of your joy in trying to suppress your sadness, it's your joy that suffers, not your sadness. But if you let your sadness be what it is, then your joy can thrive in its own way. I have long been of the opinion that all of your emotions matter. There's no good emotions or bad emotions. There's just positive emotions and negative emotions. All of your emotions have a message for you, and they're telling you that something is wrong. And that's one of the truths of trauma is wrong. Our bodies and our minds were not made to receive trauma, and yet it happens. And so we can move forward anyway. But we have these responses in our body: sadness, pain, anger. Anger is huge, and I think that it has one of the biggest stigmas. But it's still so important that it tells you that something's going on. And you don't always know for yourself what to do with those emotions. And it becomes so important to find people that you can talk to about it. I was really lucky at the time of my dad's passing that I could talk about some of these feelings that I had, both with family, as well as I had a very close friend who shared a lot of empathy. She had experience in her life with suicide of people that were close to her, and we were able to share real feelings, and that was very healing for me as well.
Isn't that amazing? You probably had, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but you had people come up to you. I was one of them. Come up and say, Dakota, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that you've been through this. I love you. I'm here for you. And those are nice, right? But this friend that you had that had experience with suicide, it's a different level of connection. Yep. Empathy just hits different than sympathy.
Yes.
And tell us about your experience with that. Like, why do you think that is?
I love that you brought up the difference between empathy and sympathy, because that's something that I've been thinking about pretty regularly since you invited me to come on the show, is that's one of the things that I think people don't always understand. And that's okay too. That's one of the things to kind of juggle when you're going through all of this, is recognizing that these people that are coming up to you, they're ultimately doing the best that they can. But for those people who are trying to help someone going through a hard time, the difference between feeling sorry for someone, which I call sympathy, and trying to feel what someone is feeling and to sit with those emotions and speak honestly about what you would feel with those emotions, that level of empathy makes such a difference. And empathy, I've found more often than not, leaves me without words, which is a frustrating place to be, but it's an honest place to be, and that's okay too. You don't have to have words for someone's trauma that you don't understand, because you don't understand. And that's okay. Just telling someone, I don't understand what you're going through, but I'm willing to listen if you want to try to explain it to me. That can be huge. I know that I had a few opportunities that I was able to do things like that and talk people through what was going on for me, where my sources of pain were, where my sources of joy were,
Man,
all of that.
sorry.
You're great.
If I had a nickel for every time I heard someone say the value of just being willing to sit with someone and to listen with them, the power of that. I don't know where this comes from, but it's kind of this rescue complex that we have, that we think that the most valuable thing we can do is fix the problem or remove the pain. But the more I hear it, the more I'm sold. And the more I'm learning from my own experiences with my loved ones is sitting with them in their pain is the most valuable thing we can do, especially if we're coming from only being able to offer sympathy. Empathy, we can do different things because we can go, hey, I've been there. This is actually what worked for me. We can offer some of those suggestions. But when we're coming from an uninformed position, the most compassionate thing we can do is just say, I love you. I'm here for you. I'm right next to you. I will be with you.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly what happened with Jesus Christ. We can read in the scriptures that he was in the Garden of Gethsemane experiencing all of this pain. And he says, take my pain away. Father, can't you take this away from me? And he says, no. And instead, he sends an angel to sit with him. And we can do that same thing. We can be that angel, or we know who the angels in our lives are. We can let them come and sit with us. Sometimes people are sitting outside uncertain what to do. They don't want to do the wrong thing, and they're paralyzed, just like I was paralyzed in my trauma. They're paralyzed because they don't know how to help someone that they care about and that they love. And something that we can do is invite them in, and we're both healed by that.
Yeah, that's so true. As you were telling that, there's this image, and maybe Jackson can add this in post, but there's this image, I think it's painted by Karl Heinrich Bloch, of the Savior in Gethsemane, and there's this angel with big, beautiful wings, like just kind of resting on his heavy shoulders and being there to comfort. It's not removing the task before him. That's not what the angel did. The Savior still had the task, the burden to bear, but at least that he had that angel there as a sign of God's love in that moment of heaviness. Thank you for sharing that illustration. You know, what's interesting about you and I, Dakota, is earlier I offered you sympathy, right? And now in the years past, I now come from a perspective of empathy. As I've shared with our listeners, I interrupted my daughter's suicide attempt, and I had a moment of freeze in that moment. I totally understand it completely. And, but not completely in the fact that, my daughter is still alive. And, so I have emotions as I hear your story, and I feel so much love and compassion for you and what you're sharing with us. How do you feel, and maybe there's nothing, and maybe there's something, but how do you feel like the Lord has found a way, or you have found a way to leverage this trauma into something good?
I think that the best thing that I've been able to do, aside from letting it work good in myself, is to take it and to talk about it. Like I said at the beginning, I've learned to be totally okay talking about it with people in a one-on-one setting and in a place that I feel safe and where I can offer my experience for consideration. just like you said, you can only understand so far because every experience is totally different. I've had family who have had other experiences with suicide. A family member who is very dear to me was dating someone, and when they broke up, he showed up at their family's house and took his life on their front lawn in front of the whole family. And again, pain, disturbing images that don't fully go away, questions that come into your life, and that there's not always a complete answer to. For me, I'm so grateful that my answer can be to turn to faith and to turn to love and to turn to family, and ultimately and most importantly for me to turn to God, to have faith in the future, whatever it might hold, and to believe that good things will come. One of my favorite quotes is that it will all work out in the end. And if it's not working out, it's not the end. And I don't know all of God's plans to make it work out in the end, but I do have faith that it will. It helps me answer a lot of other hard questions, as people are asking questions about challenges that they're facing, whether that be reconciling sexual identity or reconciling pains done by trusted people, or health conditions, or times when they feel like their faith isn't answered, times when they pray or receive a blessing, and in the short term, even if that short term is the rest of their life, it doesn't go the way that they always thought that it would. That ultimately, if you trust in a point beyond your sight where things can work out, it gives you capacity to take the next step.
Yeah. You know, one thing I've admired about you for years, Dakota, is your ability to love anyone, no matter their background, no matter their faith status, no matter their lifestyle. You have a gift for that. It's amazing. And maybe this is a strange question for a faith podcast.
Yeah.
But if you could give advice to a loved one or to someone who has experienced similar trauma to yours that chooses not to have faith, without the invitation to inviting them to faith, what would your advice be?
Yeah, this is something that I think about a lot because faith is so nuanced. Some people choose to put their faith in God in the form of organized religion. Some people choose to put their faith in a more generic God or goddess or
ethereal nature.
Power, higher power, whatever it might be. And all of those are good answers. The way that I think about God, and this is kind of going back on your question a little bit, but the way that I think about God is the sum of everything good. And so if you can find good in a place outside of religion, to me, that's still approaching my God. And so if you find faith and healing in artistic expression, great. Seek that out. Seek the good, the fulfillment, the light, wherever it is for you. And if the things that I believe and the things that I've experienced and the way that I approach pursuing good in the form of approaching God can help you, wonderful. I would love to share every detail in hopes that amongst those details, you can find a piece that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the way that I believe in God, the God that I believe in, that he feels the same way. The God that I believe in is a God of love, first and foremost, and above all else. And in my scriptures, it says that the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. So much that because of the worth of souls, that's why Christ chose to perform the atonement that we've already talked about, that he did it because of love. And if God can love everyone so much as to suffer pain beyond our comprehension, then what's it to me if they choose not to approach him the same way that I do? And this isn't an intent either to project that, oh, even if you're not worshiping my God, you're worshiping my God.
Right.
I don't see it that way at all, but I recognize that in the end, if my faith is misplaced, that I feel like I'm still moving towards good. And if you're moving towards good in your own way, we're both going the same direction.
Yeah. In your faith, there's that scripture that says all things denote that there is a God.
Yep.
Anything can denote that there is God. And if someone doesn't define that as God, if they define it as good, or they define it as light, or they define it as joy, anything that is helping them to get closer to that light or to that joy or to that good is good.
Even if it carries them away from the path that I've chosen for myself. People experience an unfortunately large amount of trauma in a religious context. And it brings me a lot of sorrow, but I recognize that one of the ways to heal is to walk away from the pain. If you put your hand on a hot stove, you're not going to heal keeping it on the hot stove. And there's different ways of moving away from that source of pain, but I'm not the one to judge you for walking away from something that's hurt you. It hurts me that you found hurt in a place that I found healing and joy. And I'm sad about that, but ultimately good. You're trying to respond to the feelings that you have, the emotions that you have. And I believe wholeheartedly that all emotions are important and right. And so do it. Do what you need to do to approach good. If you're doing destructive things, then of course I have a problem with that.
Right.
And I think that there are appropriate interventions to help when someone's making destructive choices. But if you're doing things that allow you to move forward with your life, to find healing and fulfillment and all of those things, then you're doing the right thing.
And even within the context of that God, surely a God who understands the pain that we've experienced would see what logic one would have in moving away from the pain source that
Absolutely.
we're having, even if it's an error or even if it's warranted. He would understand both context.
Absolutely.
That's the Father that I understand him to be from my context of God and how I see him. So
yeah.
I think you've explained that so well. What a beautiful way to explain that. And I'm certain that all of your friends, as I've watched, all of your friends from different backgrounds just see so much goodness in you, Dakota. You bring so much light to people. And the thing that has intrigued me since 10 years ago when you went through that trauma is how you've been able to do this. Like, carry on and find life for you. And you've done that, and it's really miraculous to watch. And so thank you for inspiring me. I've thought about you ever since I've gone through these things with my family, and isn't that amazing? I mean, I drew back on years past a student that I knew had witnessed a suicide, and that has given me hope and helped me to carry on. So thank you. Thank you for your strength. Is there any last thing that, if there's a listener out there or someone, or just in general, one thing that you would hope would be conveyed in this podcast by sharing this story and smashing stigmas?
Yeah.
What would you say?
If someone out there is struggling, whether it's struggling as someone experiencing suicidal thoughts, or if you know someone who's going through that, or if there's some trauma in your past, one of the most important things I can think of is to remember how much you are loved and how much you don't see how much you are loved. One of the things that blew my mind after my dad died was we had a viewing, and we're standing in the room with the coffin, and at some point I needed to go get a drink, and we just had people coming for hours, it seemed like. And I walked out to go get a drink, and the line of people coming to show their love for my dad, who had reached a point in his life that suicide was a reality, the line of people was out the door. And I didn't even know my dad knew that many people. And to see such a huge showing of people coming to say in their own way, I love you, even after he was gone, was very eye-opening to me. And so wherever you are, whatever your hardship is, it doesn't have to be big. I think that's another stigma that we sometimes overlook, that people have bigger problems than me, therefore my problems don't deserve attention. And I don't think that's true at all. You don't have to have experienced suicide in any context to be deserving of love or for your challenges to matter. And there is love out there. People know you, they see you, they love you. And it's important to remember that.
What a beautiful illustration. I imagine your dad could not see that line of people.
Yeah.
Yet they were there. And what a great message to all of us is that there are people that we cannot see that love us, and more than we can possibly imagine or than we can perceive to be there.
Absolutely.
Dakota, thank you from sincerely the bottom of my heart for having the courage to be here and to share this story with us. I admire you so much, and the way that you've explained things has been so clear, just brilliant and so helpful. So thank you for that courage, and thank you for blessing us with your story and being willing to share that with people.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Dakota.